2023 Cavalry into the win column.
Buddy, happy Victoria Day and welcome to the Canadian Premier League Newsroom presented by Volkswagen. My name is Christian Jack and it is arguably the most important week, I think, on the field in the history of the Canadian Premier League. That's right. In a couple of days' time, we will have not one, but two semifinals between MLS and CPL teams as they clash to make a Canadian Championship final coming up on June the 7th. It is Canadian Championship week, and we will preview that very shortly. First, though, week 6 is in the books in the Canadian Premier League, which saw two close games that ended in draws and two games with two overwhelming victories. The results this past weekend were Forge 0, Vancouver 0. That happened on Friday night at Tim Hortons Field, the first 0-0 ever in the league at Tim Hortons Field since the CPL began in 2019. On Saturday, Halifax Wanderers 0, York United 3, goals from Baldissimo, Alou, and Samaro. Doubleheader continued on Saturday in Winnipeg as Valor and Pacific shared the spoils. Pacific Nyongabere got the goal for Valor after Sean Young's season continued very well with a goal from the visitors. And on Sunday, a much-needed victory, a first victory for Cavalry as they beat Atletico Ottawa 2-0, and it could have been more quite handedly with goals from Sergio Camargo and Dan Klump. That is where we start the show this week in Calgary, Alberta, where the pressure certainly was on Tommy Wheeldon Jr.'s side to win a game, having played 5 games already this season, led in all 5, and ended up drawing all 5. That's right. They'd already given away 10 points from winning positions. So it could have gone either way here. If they'd lost, the pressure would have mounted. But in the end, they more than made up for that with a comprehensive performance. Let's bring in our own Mitchell Tierney, who was our correspondent on this one. Mitch, happy holiday to you. Thanks for spending some time with us. Let's get into this. Overall, with all the stories thrown in and what you saw of it, what number out of 10 would you give this contest in terms of its compelling factor and why? What did you like?
Yeah, I'll go with an 8 out of 10. I think the storyline surrounding this match, even before kickoff, made it so intriguing just because, these were two sides that really didn't expect to be at the bottom end of the table to start the season, this far in, and certainly didn't expect to have just one win between them heading into this match. So, yeah, it was an important match for both of these sides. And I think Cavalry, seeing as they were the one who hadn't won yet, they needed this even more than Ottawa potentially. And you saw that through their performance over 90 minutes. Everything that got thrown their way, they adapted, they overcame in the way that Tommy Wheeldon Jr. always loves to describe his side. And in the end, like you said, a pretty comprehensive performance where they get 2 goals. If you're watching on the YouTube stream right now, they had another one somewhat controversially disallowed that they felt like they should have had more. But yeah, Ottawa were never reasonably close to breaking their duck.
Yeah, that's an interesting story coming out of this because they were comprehensively better first half, up 1-0. Goal from a set piece, by the way, that Camargo actually got it. And then they actually get a goal from open play that was ruled offside for Maya Bevan interfering with Sean Melvin. I think the correct call personally. And it could have gone either way at that point. No, Mitch? I mean, at that point, you start thinking if you're Cavalry, hold on, we've had 5 leads already this season. We've relinquished all of them. Now we've gone up 2-0. Hold on, it's a whistle blown. And I, at that point, certainly looked to see what kind of response we would get from them. And it was almost like the door just narrowly opening for Atletico Ottawa to squeeze their fingers in and bridge it open. But they never even got close to that door. It was just slammed shut by a very good home team.
Yeah, I think this is in some ways a narrative-changing win for Cavalry FC because, they go from winless Cavalry FC to undefeated Cavalry FC.
Correct.
I think they started to describe themselves like that. And I think it's a story change both externally and internally where, they know what we've been talking about. We as the broader media, but also us on this show in terms of, them being winless so far this season and that being a surprise. And now there's that belief that, they can close out matches. I think a very important sequence as well was towards the end of the first half, given what happened last week against Halifax when Halifax scored twice in injury time. It was Cavalry on the front foot, really pushing Ottawa back, still pinning them back instead of, maybe being a little more nervous about conceding a goal that obviously would have been a backbreaker at that point with how well they played in the first half. So from that standpoint, a tremendous performance and, one that will give Cavalry fans and them internally a lot of hope going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It's quite amazing how things can turn on one game. We'll get that
Mhm.
more into later with York United, but in a league of real parity where points are shared a lot, when you can get those three, it's a major difference maker. You could see the smile on his face afterwards. It was a real achievement, and Tommy Wilden Jr. has been there since the start. He knows when he talks about reference points and comparing it to what they've accomplished. He certainly was full of positivity for his team after this one.
I'm just proud of the players. We kept talking over and over about the good things they were doing, and I think we've had some unlucky goals, bobbles, bounces, circumstances, and the power of belief, because I believe in this group. It's a talented group, and you've seen that today against a very tough Ottawa team. They're coming off the back of a 5-0 away win, feeling confident, and I thought today that was one of the best performances we've had at Echo Field. So that's the team we have. And we still have players to come back in, like Joe Mason, Shamit Shome, Callum Montgomery. We're only going to get stronger. So we said we want to protect this unbeaten run, but now start turning ties into wins, and we did exactly that. So it was good. It's nice to feel that, because now the boys believe in us, believing in them.
Yeah, belief being the word, and interesting to say. I mean, they've got a phenomenal home record, and Tommy puts that right near the top of their performances. Before we get more from Mitchell on this one, a great start for the season and great to see Sergio Camargo. Of course, one of the main originals around for a long time now with Cavalry Football Club. Been hurt a lot, but when he's on the pitch, they are a difference maker. He certainly was a difference maker on this one. Scored a crucial goal, and here's his thoughts after this.
You hit it right on the head. I think we knew we've been working towards this game today. We've had glimpses in the past games that we just haven't been able to put a full 90 minutes together, whether it be a lack of concentration defensively or no killer instinct in the final third. Today we were able to score 3. It should be 3-0 there at least, but it was just a complete game that we knew we were able to do. And it's so special to do it in front of these guys, in front of this crowd.
Mitchell, before we move on quickly, before we go to Atletico Ottawa, you pointed it out, the attacking flow of the team. And again, the difference maker in set plays. When they needed them, they were efficient last season, certainly in the first half of the season. And again, here they were big.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the man you just saw on your screen or heard, Sergio Camargo, was central to that, because he made the sort of runs that just opened up space for everyone else. Sometimes he'd be past Meyer Bevan, and then all of a sudden Bevan can drop a little bit, and that's pulling defenders in. He'd be out wide combining with Musi, or on the other side combining with Escalante. So that was so important. And then in getting in those areas, all of a sudden they're able to win some free kicks in dangerous spots. And against Ottawa sides, against any side, really, there's so many good defensive teams in this league. We always say, those set pieces are so important, because the teams have to back off. They have to give you that space. And, so being good and lethal in those moments is a difference maker over the course of the season. So it was good to see that from a Cavalry perspective again.
Yeah, now we're not one for excuses here, but we have to lay out facts. Atletico Ottawa had played in midweek 10 days ago in Hamilton in the Canadian Championship, had boarded on a bus to get home right away. I think got home around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. 2 days later, they flew to Vancouver. Then they flew back, and then they had to fly earlier to Calgary because of the storm, because of the fires. Not sure when they were going to play. They had to get there. So it's been a grueling time for them. I don't think Carlos Gonzalez wanted to talk about that after the game. He was also talking about what was on the pitch, but not an ideal circumstances for this team heading into this one. Here's Carlos Gonzalez's thoughts after this. Another loss for Atletico Ottawa.
Well, mainly because to win one more reference in attack, because he was going to play more central in the attacking phase, and we had two strikers to have more numbers over there. And defensively, because we think that Malcolm Shaw always gives a good job in the wide side.
Carlos Gonzalez talking about Malcolm Shaw's inclusion. They played Malcolm Shaw in the game from the start, and Sam Saul, so they just couldn't get anything going. How disappointing was this? Their third loss in 6. They didn't have their third loss until their 11th game last year. What went wrong?
Well, I do think that that's a key point there, in terms of, you don't want to pin the blame on one tactical decision, but they put in Malcolm Shaw, and you're thinking, oh, they might play with 2 up top, but instead Shaw goes out wide in place of Gianni Dos Santos, as a player who, was supposed to be that reference point on the left side of the pitch, and instead ended up getting pinned back by Musi and aired, very well back there. So and that's what they need, is those out balls. They become so important, is those players up the pitch, who they can, when they win the ball back, quickly move them to. And a lot of the times, Shaw was at the byline defending Ali Musi, and so they get the ball back. They're like, oh wait, where can we go with it? So that I think was probably the biggest issue in terms of Ottawa. Just anytime they won the ball, they weren't able to, progress it or even keep it, because so many of their players are pushed so far back down the pitch. So that's a continuous concern for them. Set piece defending, another thing that just continues to be an issue for this club, not just defending, but giving them away in bad areas. We talk about Farron in the CanChamp, Babuli against York's, Salouf's Olympico, and then both the set pieces in this game. There's countless examples of them giving away bad set pieces, and then also, allowing goals off them as well.
Yeah, great point. And that was certainly on the mind of one of their veterans, a player who came in during the first half for an injury. Here's Maxime Tissot.
From being on the field, I think, we had trouble getting out when we won the ball, because we were sitting deep at times. Guys maybe weren't in the proper positions to help us, get the ball forward and try to create something from there. So I feel like our first pass out was a low percentage pass, or a risky one, and it complicated things for us. I thought in the last 10 to 15 minutes we did a better job. Obviously, we're down 2-0, so the other team is sitting back a little bit more, but that's something we kind of had troubles with last year once we were down, and it's something we'll have to work definitely.
On that all week as they get set to welcome Forge for the first time since the Canadian Premier League final back in October. That will take place this weekend, while Cavalry make a trip also to Ontario. They take on York United next week. Mitch, we appreciate you. You'll be back on later to preview the CanChamps. We'll chat with you then. Thanks a lot, Mitchell. We'll chat with him later. Let's bring in Charlie O'Connor-Clark now to look at the other convincing victory of the weekend. Charlie, you were all over this for us at canpl.ca as York United absolutely dominated at the Wanderers grounds again. Overall, with everything thrown in, what number would you give this out of 10 for its compelling factor, and why? What did you like about this one?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 7 here. It was a really fascinating game. I think there were so many storylines that came out of it in terms of the way both teams played. Obviously, it's a huge result for York, who were maybe having a bit of a downstretch. They'd obviously lost heavily at Pacific the weekend before, and they'd lost to the Whitecaps in a midweek. But to come out flying as they did in Halifax is just so heartening for Martin Nash and his staff. That's something that Nash spoke about several times during the week leading up to this game, is that he wanted his team to start well, which they hadn't done really in any game so far this year. And I don't think you can ask for a much better start than he saw from his team here. They were direct, they were aggressive. They really made good use of a lot of these chances that they had early on. And just you can maybe see in the body language of a lot of players on the pitch how much it means for them to finally have a bit of an offensive outburst after maybe struggling to put the ball in the net earlier.
Yeah, this was by far and away their most impressive performance of 2023, without question, for a lot of reasons, but you alluded to it. What I liked about it too was that Martin Nash, who I think is a pretty laid-back character, I think he's okay with us calling him that, but he, like you said, he had some pointed words publicly for what he wanted to see from his team. So, if he's doing that publicly, I wonder what he's doing privately, and his players responded. If anybody's wondering about whether the players are responding to him, I think that was a pretty clear indication, no? So every credit. I know it's a long way for York fans to chant, to go and chant, but if they were there, they might be saying to Halifax, can we play you every week? Because they like going there, Charlie. In terms of individual performances from York, there were a lot that stood out. Who did you like?
Yeah, well, there were a few. I think we have to start with Austin Ricci, obviously, who was named our player of the week earlier today. This is a game that was tailor-made for a player like him, right? I think back to his time at Valor and early in that bubble in Winnipeg, where he was just a dominant force in direct, wide open games, like just driving forward, bringing the ball into the attacking half. He'd hold it up, he'd create chances, and he was the same in this game. He won so many duels. I think he had 4 successful dribbles in the first 15-20 minutes of this game, which is insane. And he's just one of those players that when he is in a game that suits him, he's just unstoppable and he's fascinating to watch. But, all over this performances for York that were great. I mean, Osama Olu playing in the 10 with Babuli injured, he was really occupying a space that Halifax kind of left empty for a lot of the game, which we'll get to in a second. He was great. I think a player that has maybe come to some criticism early in the year that maybe deserves a shout out here is Asazi de Rosario's hold up play in this game. That was also very important. And then the pivot of Baldissimo and Sumaro in midfield was phenomenal, especially in the second half where York were maybe settling down a little bit more and just trying to force Halifax to play around the perimeter and take really, really low percentage shots.
Yeah, lots of individual performances, but in the end, it was the collective that won out. And that, of course, led to a delighted Martin Nash.
We challenged each other, to be fair, as a group, that we needed that kind of energy and effort for 90 minutes. And it was great to see, the players brought everything they could to the game. And we had a number of chances first half, and it was great to get two. And but I thought the energy that we put in when we were pressing, closing them down, getting their heads down, being able to turn the ball over was the big key tonight.
The other side, and by the way, if you're watching live, please put your comments in. Mitchell, we'll get to yours in a second. You got good questions about Halifax, but leave your questions in the chat. As for the other side, Halifax Wanderers came into it unbeaten, and they come out of it winless. With more on that, and by the way, it's a pretty honest answer here, but a very dejected Patrice Geyser after a 3-0 loss at home.
There's always positive. Listen, I don't want to be a cliche, but even when you get beat that bad, you learn and you just say, hey, take that feeling, keep it inside, never let it come back again. So for me, that's the biggest takeaway. I don't want to use very strong words, but I mean, I'm ashamed for being able to put up that display in front of our home fans. But, you look at it, we created some chances with good ball movement, running between lines, running at them and just being hungry. We're so close, but so far, because we didn't get a goal and they got 3.
Hear from Patrice there using the word ashamed. What did you make of Halifax here? Lots of praise for the way that they play, but that's no wins in 6 now. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, well, what went wrong specifically in this game is perhaps that Lorenzo Caligari got 4 yellow cards in 4 straight games. I don't think... Yeah, exactly. I don't think... And Patrice Geyser said this as well. He knew that they'd miss Caligari in this game. He didn't know that they'd miss him that much. You look at the 2 York goals in the first half, and there is a chasm of space in between Halifax's back 4 and their midfield because the players they had in there, Mo Omar under Rampersad, and it was Aiden Daniels or Massimo Ferrin in that spot for a lot of the first half. They would all go forward with the ball, and nobody would be left occupying that space. So if York won the ball as they did, there's just so much room for Alou and for Ricci to run into. There just wasn't that link. And I think this is maybe a game where, Christian, I think you guys spoke about this on the broadcast as well, but it's a game where maybe Patrice Geyser was thinking more long-term than short-term. Obviously, a big priority for Halifax this year is getting Rampersad higher up the pitch, playing as more of an 8 than a 6 this year, and getting him more involved in the attack. And I think it would have been maybe easier and the obvious thing to do to just put him back into that 6 as he's played before for this team, where Caligari would have been. He chose to keep him in that higher role up the pitch because it's important to him to make sure that the rest of the team is comfortable with Rampersad in that specific role. And it didn't work out. It really didn't work for them at all. The connection just wasn't there between the lines, between the defense and the midfield. Even when they did get up the pitch as well, especially in the second half when York was sitting back a little bit more, they couldn't find a way in. Halifax had 2 shots on target in this game, and they were both from outside the box. Which is just not indicative of being able to find high quality chances. So I think there was, a lot to learn from this game for Halifax, but I do think that it's one where maybe you kind of burn the tapes a little bit because it was a bit disastrous in the first half.
Yeah, no doubt. It doesn't get any easier, by the way. Back-to-back trips to Pacific and Atletico Ottawa to come for Patrice Geyser. Maybe that'll help. And then Ottawa, Valor and Cavalry at home after that. Mitchell in the chat asks, what does Halifax have to do to win? And do you see them in a home playoff game at the end of the season? A reminder that it has to be a top 4 finish. I think even the most positive Halifax Wanderers fan, or player, or by the way, Patrice Guys is probably at the top of that list because he is Mr. Positive, I think, when it comes to this.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say, Charlie, and tell me if you disagree, that they don't believe, maybe I'll change that. I think thinking they're going to finish in the top 4 is beyond any of their aspirations right now. They want to get in the playoffs, and I think they're good enough to make the playoffs. But to get a home playoff game that is top 4, that's going to be a challenge. I think we've seen that here. It has to be said that the way they want to play is the hardest thing to do in football, right? Yeah. It's easy if you want to try and figure a way out. Banks of 4, play on the counter-attack, defensively be organized. Let's not concede. Let's get some points. But they're playing the long game here. And where they've come from, where it was very, very difficult to watch, and the goals per game were the lowest in any club in the CPL, and at times it was torturous. They feel like this is their step of progression, but it is a giant step. And along that way, they're going to get moments like this. I think I said it the first game when they won in Ottawa on the broadcast. When they play this way, occasionally they're going to get annihilated. And they got that on Saturday. And it's hard. It's hard for the Wanderers fans. They're brilliant. They're the best in the league. And they go home disappointed. But I just hope that they understand football and that they can still see keys that they can turn this around. But it's going to take some time. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. This is a project. And I think that there's been no secret about that from day one in Halifax this year. It's a project that will take time, especially with how many new players are out of this squad, all learning a completely new system under a coach who's, in his first role as a professional head coach as well. Yeah. We have to remember there are tons of positives. Those building blocks are there. It will take a lot of time, I think, and maybe. Well, you can't really talk about your goal being top 4 right now. I think the goal is to win a game first.
Right.
But I think that if I'm a Halifax fan, I think I am okay with this, at least, being a longer term project, knowing where this team started, where it was last year and even the year before, and where this kind of football can take them. Right. Because I think that if you do get that buy-in, obviously, even as a player, it's hard to buy into it if you are getting beaten like that. But I think it will come. And once they do rattle off a win or two, use it playing the same kind of football, that belief will be stronger and it'll just kind of snowball from there.
Yeah, I don't expect them to make changes, too many things. I don't think they're going to panic. I will say they love that back 3 in possession. That's why Campagna plays there. It's not a rampaging fullback. I wonder whether that's the future. I wonder whether it's a back 3 is the future, and maybe you can play Caligari and Rampersad almost as double pivots, and then you can maybe get a bit more pace. Maybe it's Wafonso or Mwamba or somebody who can play a little bit behind just stretch the field a little bit. But hey, so I think there's lots of questions there. But in the end, we have to finish a great day for York, no doubt about it. A great day, and 2 wins already pushes them above Halifax to get to 6 points, and lots of players will be in the team of the week. And as you said, congratulations to Austin Ricci, the player of the week. 2 ACL injuries, not 1 but 2. The work he did behind the scenes when no one was watching, now he finally gets his reward. Charlie, we appreciate you. We'll have you back on the show in a while. Thanks for that. As we get set to preview the Canadian Championship semifinals, we'll be doing that within the next 10 or 15 minutes. A reminder that CPL Predictor is back, brought to you by our friends at TonyBet, campl.ca/predictor, where you choose the correct scores each week in the Canadian Premier League to win up to $20,000. Tickets to games, it's all there on the site. Next, we move on to Winnipeg, Manitoba, where Valor welcomed a Pacific team that made 8 changes, leaving behind many of their stars ahead of the Canadian champions the Canadian Championship this week. Injury-ravaged Valor had no such luxury. Benedict Rhodes, thankfully, he avoided the Winnipeg injury curse to join us. Overall, Benny, what number out of 10 would you give this contest in terms of its compelling factor, and why? What did you like about this one?
I'll give it a 7.5. I think it's a game. You mentioned 8 changes for Pacific. I think that in itself was quite compelling to see how the players coming into the squad we're going to do. And I think they, as we're going to talk about, I think they played very well. They didn't allow wholesale changes to affect the way they played, which I think something James Merriman especially was quite complimentary of. And then for Valor, a makeshift backline, as you mentioned, Jordan Hames and Abdou Samake both getting injured. I think that was a big storyline in this game, and but Valor still were able to be resilient and able to hold their own against a very difficult team to play against in Pacific.
Yeah, this was a really good game. Did this for One Soccer, and it was the biggest storyline came at the start with the lineups, and suddenly you look at it. For those who didn't know, no Amir Didic, no Thomas Miyajigir, no Manny Aparicio, no Josh Hurd, no Easton Ongaro was on the bench. There's a few players there that they left out, and has made 8 changes. But in the end, it looked like they were going to get a victory through Sean Young's goal. But the man himself, again, Pacific Nyongabire, who's been one of the big stars so far of the Canadian Premier League, one of the key signings as an overseas talent who came from the A-League, the Burundi International, was able to get that goal. His first since he's been in the CPL. And before we get to talk more about Valor, let's hear from him himself after he got the key equalizer at IG Field.
We've played a few games now, and it's just a goal I really needed, confidence, and obviously just to boost the team. The team was like we're getting really hammered, and it was really a booster. He lifted the team, everybody's spirits, and it's a goal I really needed.
For him, it's a good character as well. It's been tough though for Valor, Benedict, no question about it. You mentioned it. Andrew Jean-Baptiste is their linchpin at the back. He hasn't played a minute yet. Chandler's now done for the season, and Pinelli got hurt. Rafa Ohin is hurt. Abdou Samaki, a terrific player who was going to play against his former club, got hurt in the warm-up. Then Jordan Haynes played instead of him coming off the bench, just recently coming back and injured for himself. He lasted 20 minutes and did his hamstring. So they've got hardly any fit defenders. Yet they continue to find a way. If any team had the right to complain and really say we're struggling right now, it would be them. But every time we talk about this team, we talk about the word resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only healthy center back there at the moment, I believe, is Clyde Chella, who just signed a couple of weeks into the season. So they've had a lot of changes at the back. They've been very hit by injuries, and a lot of players playing out of position. Matteo De Brienne still playing at left back 6 weeks into the season. They've haven't had a consistent back line. They haven't had, consistent midfield. Dante Campbell missing from this game through suspension as well. It's impressive. I think that Phil DeSantos, or in this case, Daryl Fortes and Jay Bindi, they be able to sort of rally the troops, I guess, and tell these guys, like, you guys are going through adversity, but like play through that. And then when all these guys do come back, you're going to be, a heck of a team when you can add the quality to a team that is already playing, quite well given the circumstances that they're in. Yeah, and quickly, before we hear some reaction, you did get the chance to speak to Philip DeSantos recently. No, it doesn't appear that there's any seriousness to too many more. It feels like some of these are coming back soon. Yeah, and there's no updates on Samake or Haynes yet, but before the game, Phil DeSantos said that by next week, when they go to Vancouver, they're expecting to have, Andrew Jean-Baptiste and Rafa Ohin on the bubble of maybe coming back for that game, or at least maybe the game after that. That's terrific news, certainly, for Valor. You mentioned it. Philip DeSantos was away this weekend on pro coaching duties. And in his absence, Jay Bindi and Daryl Fordyce took the reins. Here is the Irishman, not Northern Irishman, Daryl Fordyce.
The medical team say, hey, he's not good to go. We make a decision. Jordan Haynes, who's a left back, straight in the centre back, just coming back from injury. And then Jordan goes down, and then we put a right back and the centre back, and we bring a scanner on. So obviously we're struggling a little back at the back with bodies and that. But as I say, the boys don't feel sorry for themselves. They get up, they go again, and they continue to go until that referee blows a whistle, and that's very, very proud of that.
To them, great credit also to Pacific. James Merriman made 8 changes coming in. This one, you could argue, and I know Valor have had a lot of issues, but you could argue that they probably should have won this. Questions on maybe Nyongabire goal. Was it offside? Was it not? They certainly should have had a penalty in the second half with handball on Matteo De Brienne. In the end, they get a point. What impressed you about this team, and who impressed you from them? Yeah, Sean Young impressed me. I think, we've been talking all season about him. He's becoming one of the more dominant, I think, midfielders on both sides of the ball in the entire CPL at the moment. He's added an attacking element to his game that maybe didn't always have last season. He's playing higher up the pitch, like you've been saying all season, and arriving into the box and getting the opportunities to score goals. And I know you compared him, great praise to Jonathan Osorio on the broadcast, where he's able to make these runs in the box. He has a bit of an ability to finish when he gets opportunities, and he sort of ran the show on a team where there's 8 changes, and he was one of the
too, alongside Cedric Toussaint as well, who's excellent in this game, playing alongside him in midfield. So I think that was the difference in this game. I think it was Pacific in midfield. They were kind of overrunning, I guess, the Valor midfield, and they couldn't find the second goal, and they couldn't hang on to that 1-goal advantage. But for a team with so many new players in the squad, I think it's a result that they'll be happy with.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Cedric Toussaint, every week we try and get him in the team of the week, and every week he just misses out. It's just, I guess that's what happens when you're defensive midfielder who doesn't score goals. But he's been marvelous for them. I'm really excited to see him play midweek against Vancouver Whitecaps. But Sean Young, the skipper, the island boy from Victoria, continues to stand out for the young 22-year-old Canadian. Here's James Merriman, his gaffer, on Sean Young.
He's playing with confidence. He's found his form early in the season, which is great for him because now he's adding detail to his game. He scores a great goal today. He's wearing the captain band because this is the respect that the group has for him. He's 22 years old. So I think what we're seeing off the ball, on the ball, he's playing his best football right now.
Yeah, first game for him as well. Spoke to him after the game, full of praise for him, and also delighted for him to get that captain's armband, a really special moment for Sean Young and his family. Both teams head out west now. Pacific already home. We'll get to that in a second. Why? Valor, as you mentioned, Benny, they go to Vancouver next week. Hopefully with some more repaired bodies ready for this one. Benny, we always appreciate you. Thanks for your time, and we'll chat with you next week. We continue here on the Newsroom presented by Volkswagen for the final game of 4 and head back to Friday night's clash at Tim Hortons Field, where I was certainly taking on this match pretty well, thinking, as most people thought, that it would be probably a comprehensive victory for Forge. Remember, Forge came into this on the back of a good victory the week before. Vancouver had struggled. In fact, they got absolutely annihilated at home by 5-0 in the week prior to that. And it looked like very early with Wubens Passius and a number of opportunities from different players that Forge should definitely take goals here. Great chance by Noah Jensen in the first half and Wubens Passius. But in the end, they couldn't put it away. Vancouver were very good defensively. Crawford and Kwok, particularly out wide, in the fullbacks, defended very narrow as a back four. Pele Martinez and Ibrahim Bakri were concentrated the entire time. But as the game went on, they got deeper and deeper, and it appeared to be the inevitable would come. Jordan Hamilton looked like he was going to be the man who would get the goal. In the end, I think he had an XG of about 1.5 on his own, but he wasn't able to score. As we mentioned off the top of the show, it would end scoreless, and that is the first time in the history of the Canadian Premier League that there's ever been a 0-0 at Tim Hortons Field in the CPL. That is a remarkable achievement for a team like Vancouver Football Club, who are only 6 games old. In the end, when Jordan Hamilton blasted it over at injury time, it appeared the script was already written. It would end Forge of Hamilton 0, Vancouver FC 0. Great point for Vancouver, particularly after giving up 5 goals the week before. After the match, I had the pleasure, it's always a pleasure indeed, to catch up with Vancouver FC boss. Here's Ashwin Gotpi. Joined by Vancouver FC head coach Ashwin Gotpi here at Tim Hortons Field for the post-game reaction brought to you by Allstate. 0-0. A great point for you. How do you feel?
I'm really proud of the effort that our players brought into this match, especially after what we've experienced in the last few days. It's been a very difficult week after such a devastating loss and missing 3 very key players. I think we came here to defend well as a team and look for our moments. That we had our chances in the game, but we also gave away some chances that we were fortunate enough that they didn't score.
That's a very fair assessment. What you probably don't know, Coach, is that you're the first team in CPL history to come here and draw 0-0. It's never been happened before, even since 2019. What does that say about how much you're already accomplishing in the short amount of time of your club? To be able to come to a place here where you expect teams to win, the home fans, and you come away with a 0-0 draw.
Well, I like to give the credit to my players because they had to really work very hard in this game and stay disciplined in their defending structure. I think when we defend well as a team, we are a difficult team to beat at home or away. But as we've seen, when you have so many young players and players without the experience, to bring consistency game in and game out and playing for 90 minutes plus with concentration is not so easy.
A couple more for you, if you don't mind. You changed the system a little bit today, a little bit of 2 banks of 4, 1-1. Sandoval and Hundal did really well running the lines and getting the ball when they needed to. What did you like about the personnel within that shape today?
Well, I think that puts Sandoval in the position that he's comfortable. He's closer to goal. He's got a cover of 8 players behind him, so he can maybe defensively take the breaks he needs to offensively give us the creativity that brings to the game. I think he had his best game of the season, and I think the block of 8 did a good job, especially in the first 30 minutes of the match. But it's a long trip. It's been a tough week, and we had players in the team that had not ever started for us. So I'm really satisfied, and it's a fantastic point.
Last one for you. It is a fantastic point. Momentum and swings are everything in football. You mentioned it last week. You got beat handedly 5-0. How big is it to be able to stop that rut right away and get a point after it?
Well, I'm a big believer that if you want to achieve something in a season, that you should never lose 2 games in a row. So one of the things that's really important is tactically make the adjustments necessary, which we did, and then bring a different kind of commitment and intensity as a group. And I think that's when you lose 0-5, it's quite humiliating at home and humbling. And I think our players learned the lesson that this is not an easy league. You have to come into every match with everything you got.
Congratulations. It's a terrific point. Safe travels back to Vancouver.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
He's a great man. He mentioned the 2 players there that started their first Vancouver game. That was, of course, Nicky Jima and Marcus Simmons. On the other side of things, a frustrating night for Forge. I know they came into the game saying they did not want to have more than, I suppose, a slight side eye on Montreal coming in midweek, but it was seemingly had more than that. Some changes in the team, obviously some key players who didn't start the game. Tristan Borges didn't start the game, neither did Kyle Becker, amongst others. Tristan Henry was on the bench as well. They had over 70% possession at times in this game, lots of chances, but in the end, no end product. That was certainly on the mind of their head coach, Bobby Simoniotis, after this one.
We could have made a lot more of those motions, to be honest. So we got in there and, yeah, of course, finishing. If you look at some of the chances that we've had with Pasillas, with Jensen in the first half, Jordan Hamilton's had 2. There's a few in the end there. So, the chances are there. So we just got to be clinical in there. But I think, if we increased also the amount of times we're able to work certain patterns that we do, maybe, yeah, you're happy that you have so much possession and 18 shots, but maybe you needed 30 today and 5 on the goal to get the goal. And sometimes that's how it goes. Sometimes you just need 1, and that's football. So you move on from this one. You take the good, you look at the bad and the ugly, and you try and make sure that the players are aware of it, so we can be better in the next one.
Forge remain undefeated and are top of the table as we look at the standings in the CPL through 6 weeks. 3 wins and 3 draws for Forge as they are top by a point, 12 points from 6 games. Pacific right behind them, 11 points from 6 games. Cavalry are third now on 8 as Valor move up down to 4th on 7. York United on 6 with Vancouver Football Club. And then Atletico Ottawa and Halifax Wanderers on 7th and 8th. On 5 points apiece. Next week in the CPL, week 7, and it starts in the nation's capital. Atletico Ottawa versus Forge at 2 p.m. at TD Place, a rematch of last season's final. Pacific versus Halifax at 7 p.m. local on Saturday. That'll be a good game out west as well. York against Cavalry, 5 o'clock Eastern on Sunday. And talking of 5 o'clock local on Sunday, the doubleheader concludes on Sunday. Vancouver Football Club against Valor. We now turn our attention to a huge week in the Canadian Championship. In fact, you could argue this is the biggest week ever for the Canadian Premier League. It is a doubleheader on Wednesday night, and it starts at Stade Saputo on Wednesday. We'll start the preview for that as you look ahead. Wednesday, Stade Saputo, CF Montreal against Forge. Let's bring in our own Charlie O'Connor-Clark, who will be covering this match in Montreal as Forge FC, I think, really start to think, Charlie, that this could be their moment. Now, we're going to get into this in detail, the history of all this in a second. But let's just talk about what we were talking about in the week 6 recap show there for a minute. And the conversion of chances. Should that be their major concern heading into this game? That Forge have probably not been clinical enough. And if those chances come, whether it be 1 or whether it be 6, they've got to be more clinical in front of goal.
Yeah, I think it's a concern every time a CPL team goes up against an MLS team, because that's one of the biggest differences, right? When you go and play at that level as a CPL team, is that in a CPL game, you might get 3 or 4 of those chances. Right. Against an MLS team, you will probably get 1. And if you don't score it, then that's it. I'm sorry. And I think Forge know that. though. Forge are aware, they remember maybe not their game in Montreal last year, but their game against Montreal the year before, where they didn't take their chances. It ended up going to penalties, and it didn't work out for them after 11 shooters. But I think that it will be kind of the main focus for them this week. I think you probably will. I have to think you probably see Wubens Passius start up front. I think he's probably been the most clinical of the Forge strikers so far this year. And he's got a track record with this team for scoring in big moments, including in the semifinal last year of the CPL. But I do think that will be the key for Forge, is that they might not have the ball a ton in this game. They'll probably have a decent amount, because they always do, no matter who they're playing. They will probably have a couple chances, and they know that they can't waste them. They can't be looking to move the ball around to higher quality areas. You just have to pull the trigger sometimes when you do get to those areas. And I think that will be something that's kind of a focus for Bobby Smirniotis in training this week.
And you mentioned that a little bit in your CanPL.ca piece this week, and the in-depth analysis of their tactical attack and how versatile they can be. So check out that piece now on CanPL.ca by Charlie. Charlie also mentioned their past performances. Montreal, a familiar opponent now for this team. Here's Cal Becker on some of those past performances that Forge have played in the Canadian Championship.
I think it's a competition we want to do well in. I feel like we've been a little hard done by, lost in penalties twice. It's a fantastic opposition, but at the end of the day, we've gone into those games and we've kind of put our stamp on it. We didn't really just sit back and absorb pressure. We tried to implement how we played, and we had success for it. So I think we can be proud of the performances that we've had in this competition against the fantastic opponents that we've had in TFC and Montreal. It's massive. I think anytime when you're a player, I can't speak to it enough. You want to play against the best players. You want to test yourself. So I think we have a lot to be proud of. But yeah, definitely, I think there's a hunger and there's a desire to keep pushing the envelope and do better.
Now, one of the games that Becca didn't mention there was last year in CF Montreal, where Forge went with high hopes, but in the end, I think very rarely, one of the very few times you can ever remember in the history of this club, came off the pitch at the end of it, really not showing anywhere near the best of themselves. Before we talk a little bit more about that and the rematch and potential redemption from that, let's hear now about that game from Tristan Borges.
Splits the seam. Montreal are in. Henry goes down, but he's beat clean. They've been strong, and it was always one that they expected to win. It's one that they did win. Wilfred Nancy and company.
Just being here the years that I've been at Forge, I would say that's probably one game that we really kind of just went off the field and we're like, it wasn't a game that we wanted to perform like that, right? It's against a big team like what Montreal is, and us knowing what we're capable of doing and what we've been able to produce against big clubs already. I think that kind of left a bad taste in the mouth, and it was tough to kind of get over and move on from that. But like I said, it's in the past. For us, it's just about looking forward and understanding we put ourselves in another situation to be in games like this. And I think at least the moments that I've been here already with Forge, it's whenever big games come here, especially in Hamilton, but sometimes away as well. I think we tend to perform in big games, and hopefully it stays like that.
Borges is right. You expect them to perform in big games. They did not perform that day, Charlie, for whatever reason. Yeah. Is there something to be said that maybe Forge were more of a team in transition at that moment that weren't quite ready, and that this time we feel like will be different?
Yeah, it's weird because that's a game that I think, at least I do, and I think a lot of people in the CPL kind of just block out of their memory, because it was just such a weird one where you expected a lot more from Forge considering how close they'd come against Montreal the year before. Obviously, there's no need for extra motivation, but it was there. But it was a weird moment for Forge. Obviously, they'd had a bit more of a bit more turnover in the offseason than I think we really knew at the time. I don't think we really talked about it enough, but like 5 players of the 11 that they started in that game in Montreal were new to the club, and it was very early in the season. They still had Abubakar Sissoko playing right back in that game. I think Rezat Rama had been there a couple of weeks. I think at that point they were 2-2-2 at that point. They were still figuring things out, in this kind of new look Forge that, obviously is a much more refined version of it now as they come into this game. And I think this will be a very different Forge that we see, because again, that was really maybe the only time I can think of in Forge's history where they've come into a big game and just been flat.
Yeah.
Right. I can't think of really a lot of other times that's ever happened for them. So it was uncharacteristic and a strange time for the club at that point. But I do think that I'd imagine there'll be a lot of similar players in the starting 11 on Wednesday as there were in that game. And they're miles further along, I think, than they were at that point last year. So I think that there will be, I hope at least you'll see a more coherent and a more, prepared version of Forge for this game.
Yeah, the outcome may be similar. I think the performance will be very different. I think it's just clear. Forge, more than any team in the CPL, are creating real football heritage moments. Tons of reference points. You mentioned it. Big games, CONCACAF League, Champions League, Canadian Championship victories, and of course, North Star Shields. And this really is the next step for the development of that club. That is what I posed when I asked Bobby Smirniotis that question. Here is what he told me.
When you're building the culture and identity of a club and you're thinking long term, take all the big clubs around the world. They've had various defining moments, winning championships, overcoming something in a European or South American competition. So I think everything we can add, adds to the mystique of this club down the road. That there are these stories being told, not only of championships won in the CPL, not only of journeys in CONCACAF and the different things that go along, but there also is a trophy that represents this tournament in the cabinet. And I think that's what we want to do here long term, so long as I'm here, is keep on creating these stories as best as possible for the future generations.
Incredibly powerful words, no? He's right, though, isn't he? This is their next frontier, no? This is the next one that they want.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a lot that I can say that Bobby didn't say much better just then. Forge have been the first CPL team to do a lot of things, to win a championship, to go to CONCACAF, to play in the Champions League. They are desperate to be the first CPL team to win that Voyageurs Cup. They came so close against TFC last year, but this one would be different because it's a full-length Canadian Championship tournament. It's not just a one-off final like it was last year. They've got so much experience now playing against these MLS teams after a few years. They know what they need to do. They're ready for it, and it is kind of that frontier, as you said. It's obviously the Canadian Championship means a lot to a lot of players in this country. There's players in that Forge locker room that know what it means. Obviously, players like Ashton Morgan, Kyle Becker, that have won it before and want nothing more than to win it for this club that they've put so much commitment and effort into over the last few years. So I think that it is really that is the prize right now. And then once that tournament's over, you turn back to the league, but it's also the earliest way that they can qualify for the CONCACAF Champions League, which is also a massive priority for that club. So this is it. This is a big one.
It's a big one, no doubt about it. We should say we know that there's a lot of players who get paid a lot more money to play in MLS than this. We understand the task at hand. Playing away from home is even harder. It's an enormous ask, and it should never be a given. But what a chance Forge have got here, and we'll certainly see that in what will be a fantastic doubleheader starting on Wednesday. Charlie, we thank you. By the way, producer Benedict tells us it's 3 years today since the opening show of the CPL Newsroom, now presented by Volkswagen. You were on that show, Charlie, so congrats on the anniversary. Thanks for all the work you continue to do, and this is why we do it, right? For games like this. So enjoy it, and I will look forward to your analysis and thoughts on Wednesday's game out of Montreal. And as usual, catch all Charlie's work at canpl.ca. Thank you, Charlie. We appreciate you, and we'll speak to you next week. For the second game, again, back-to-back on Wednesday. It is a rematch. It is the Whitecaps traveling to Starlight Stadium, and we all remember what happened there in 2021 when Pacific hosted them. That's right, Pacific knocked them out in 2021. And to preview that game, let's bring in back our own Mitchell Tierney for the second of the doubleheader. Pacific against the Whitecaps. Mitch, Pacific are a team in really good form right now. And I think that's what makes this even more juicier. Know that we got Forge and Pacific 1 and 2, best two teams on form right now in the CPL going against these MLS teams. They're no stranger to big games in the past either, Pacific. Many of them, by the way, at home. Is that the biggest storyline, or what is the biggest storyline coming into this game?
Well, I think part of it is just how much these two sides have changed since that 2021 matchup. I mean, you only got two guys on the Pacific side who started that match in Manny Aparicio and Josh Hurd, both who scored, by the way. So they become massive reference points for what Pacific are trying to do, and only 5 Whitecaps who are returning from the starting lineup as well. So I think for me, I spoke with James Merriman this week, and he just talked at length about how important of a match that was that kind of transformed Pacific as a club, both off the field, you know, what we saw in the stands during that match, but also on the field, just the belief that they had in winning that match to then go on and later that season, you know, lift the North Star Shield. With this being such a changed Pacific group, this could really be their transformational moment.
Great
and the
point.
moment that so many of these players who now pull on the purple of Pacific have their chance to beat the Whitecaps, and it unlocks a final, which would be massive for them as well, that they would host, which yeah, obviously that's a huge deal for the club. So yeah, I just think that this is their opportunity to have yet another moment that takes Pacific to the next level and puts them back in that conversation maybe for top clubs within Canada that they really want to be a part of.
Yeah, some great points there. You mentioned it, James Merriman, no stranger, of course, as well. Former employee and coach at the Whitecaps as well. There's so many connections. That's what makes it such a great storyline. Here's James Merriman on the history of Pacific within this competition.
I think it's something for the fans to get behind. It's great. It's great for the game. The memories for me are, like I said to you before, a little bit challenging, a little bit difficult. We've had these big games with the Whitecaps here at home, away to TFC. Last season, the loss to York. So we've had a lot of different experiences in the competition, which keeps us humble, hungry, knowing that it's one game. I mean, we love playing here too. I think we've got a great fan base that gets behind our team. We have a good energy here at home. Our players get up for it, especially the guys that have been here for a few years now. So we'd love to try and take advantage of the draw that we got.
It's been a great draw, no doubt about it. Absolutely fantastic draw for them so far. They've already played 4 league games at home. They've already played 2 Canadian Championship games at home. Now they get to play at home again, and then they're at home again on the weekend. And some of the players didn't even go away from home, so they're doing everything they possibly can to get the benefits here. We've talked a lot about this rivalry, Mitch. Obviously, we showed it there. They met in 2021. Do you think that's a help or a hindrance that this has already been done before? In many ways, it's positive and a help for Pacific. But on the Whitecap side, I know they keep talking about it, that they don't ever want to allow that to happen again.
I think it's a help, but for 2 separate reasons. One, I think returning to Starlight Stadium, there might be some negative history there for the Whitecaps. They've been pretty horrendous away from home over the last little bit as well. I think it was June of 2022 that they won their last MLS regular season match, and that was the last time in all competitions they won previous to going to York Lions Stadium to get into this round. So they really haven't won much away from home recently. But at the other end of the table, this almost ensures that Vancouver Whitecaps will bring their best. And I think that's something that CPL clubs always talk about when they go into this competition, is the opportunity to test themselves against these MLS sides. And so I think it's important that, they don't play a Vancouver Whitecaps B side. They don't play a side that maybe aren't up to their top standard. They play a Vancouver Whitecaps side that are ready and expecting a difficult performance. And if they can beat, the best of the Vancouver Whitecaps, then that's the next step for the Canadian Premier League is that example. And that's the next step for these players, is knowing they can step on that field against, everyday starters for the Whitecaps and beat them.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Some of those key players are in terrific form. Let's hear it from some of those specific ones now heading into this big clash.
It gives a chance for teams like us to play against higher level MLS teams and, like we saw in previous years, go on and beat them.
It's different to league games where
maybe a bit more at stake. You don't have the opportunity to lose. You don't have a next game. Every game is a knockout game. We really badly just want to win. So whoever comes, I think we're prepared for anyone. We've shown we can play against MLS team, beat an MLS team.
We knocked out Whitecaps a couple years ago. I think we want to keep BC Pacific based and no other team around, so I'm excited for that matchup. We're hyped because we probably played in those academies, and it's like a game you want to win and you want to show them what you can do and what they basically left out on.
Knockout stages, right? Knockout rounds, and there's nothing more exciting than that.
Those were the words of Easton Ongaro, Emil Gazdov, Kunle Dadaluk, and Amir Didic. Dadaluk put it best there when he talked about players playing in academies and then getting to play them again. That is full of storylines across all of CPL. We talked about it in the CF Montreal game against Forge, many of them as well. That's what's going to keep happening in this league. But that is just a spicy extra motivation for some of these players. No, Mitch?
Oh, always. I think, so many of these players believe that they should have been given the opportunity that they weren't by these clubs. And I think a lot of these players now given that second opportunity have gone on and proved that they should have been given those opportunities and have reached the next level, be that in Europe or be that back in MLS with different clubs. So, there's a number of those players. You talk about Sean Young, you talk about Kunle Dadaluk, these young guys who, have so much potential. Now they'll get the opportunity to really demonstrate that. And yeah, that's so much motivation. And like you said, especially for those guys who, are looking across the field at, some of the coaching staff and some of the players that they came up with and who maybe didn't believe in them to reach that next level.
Yeah. And one of those players is also Easton Garo, who played last year for the Whitecaps, and Kakuta Mane, who had a great career in MLS for the Vancouver Whitecaps and gets to go against them now. We're throwing all these names out, Mitch, but you know what? All of them can't start, and that's just what James Merriman's got in his hands. The depth is incredible right now. You could make a case of playing Mane through the middle with Saloof and Hurd. You could play Adonai Jarid as a false nine. Do you give Ongaro the chance? I think we know Toussaint and Young and Manny Aparicio should play that three in midfield. We expect Didic and Amir Jagir, but that front line, they've got a lot to choose from here quickly.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. I think it also gives them the opportunity to shift things. If they aren't going well or if they need an extra spark, they can bring on different players. Daniels is such a different number 9 from Easton Ongaro. Mane's a different winger. They just have so many different players who can do many different things, and that's part of what's led to their success so far in the CPL. And I think that's part of what might lead to their success against the Whitecaps. Is this is as deep of a Pacific side, at least in attack, as we've ever seen.
Yeah, Mitchell's in-depth analysis piece on this team right now is available at canpl.ca. Please catch that as well. Mitch, we appreciate you. We'll chat with you next week. Enjoy the games. It doesn't get much better than this. Folks, this will be special. It's a doubleheader, but a rare doubleheader. It's CPL versus MLS. It's the semifinals. It's on the same night. Both games live on One Soccer. Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock Eastern, then 10 o'clock Eastern, of course, 7 o'clock Pacific at Starlight Stadium. Everyone knows the difference. Everyone knows the difference in budget. Some players on an MLS squad earn more themselves than a CPL squad combined. But 2 wins from 18 attempts in the past, it's happened. CPL teams have defeated MLS teams. It has happened. 13, by the way, of those 18 games have been decided by 1 goal or less. It is tight. Both wins have come against the Whitecaps. So you're saying there's a chance? Absolutely, there's a chance. It could be a historic week for the CPL. We leave with the final word for Pacific skipper. Here's Josh Hurd.
We've had historic nights at Starlight where it's been packed and we feel the energy of the crowd and we feel invincible at times when we're here. But now we have to step out and do it. And I think it's time a CPL team wins the Canadian Championship. It hasn't been done yet, and I think we're poised to do it. Honestly, having that type of atmosphere, having a big team like the Whitecaps coming over and play, it's an easy game to get up for because as a player you want to play in big games. So hopefully we can make more memories like that here. And then right here you cue the clip of the goal.